Hey Flower Tribe, so today I'm going to show you some great tips on how to get more blooms from your hydrangeas. I have a whole bunch of hydrangeas here in this row, and they're a mixture of Endless Summer and Big Daddy Hydrangea, and these varieties bloom on what's known as old wood and also new growth. Now let me show you what I mean by that. So these blooms right here are coming up on last year's wood. So there's a whole bunch of these blooms that are coming up from this one wooded stem. So these blooms were put in place last year. If I were to have pruned this hydrangea bush back, say in like early spring, a lot of times late winter, people like to prune, they clean up. If I would have pruned this guy back, these blooms would not be here right now, because in pruning them back, I would have cut all these little tiny buds that were set on this old growth last year. So the rule of thumb is if you want a lot of blossoms, you're going to leave your hydrangea be. You're not going to prune them. And this especially goes for Nico hydrangeas. So these guys bloom on what's called old wood. So this bloom was put in place down here on this wooded stem last summer. Probably what happened was last year around August, a little bud was set in place on this wooded stem. And that little bud wound up growing to this beautiful blossom. Now what happens is a lot of people have the newer variety of hydrangeas. And the newer varieties can be cut down and they come back each year because they grow on something called new growth. Nico hydrangeas set their blooms only on old wood. So if you were to prune this bush back at the end of winter, early spring of this year, you would have cut back all of these blooms that were set in place. And these blooms will not come back for this season. These Big Daddies and these Endless Summers, they have something that's like a combination. So they bloom on the old wood, but they also bloom on new growth. And here's what I mean by new growth. Let me find a guy here. He's not going to have a bloom yet, because what happens is the new growth comes from the bottom of the plant. This is a fresh green stem. You'll see there's no old wood from last year. So this is new growth. So this guy is fresh this year. So if I were to have pruned him back, it would have been fine, because this new growth comes up later on in spring. So this bloom would come up in the end of summer. And you'll notice that it doesn't have a flower head yet, because what happens with these varieties is they give you a burst of color in the beginning of summer, and that's from the old wood, and then they give you another burst at the end of summer. So when the flowers start coming in on these new stems. So if you want a bigger flower head, then you can cut back all these original blooms and you'll get like bigger, fluffier flowers at the end of summer. But you're going to do that at the expense of having these beautiful blooms in the beginning of summer. So that's the story with your pruning. And with any kind of hydrangea, if you're not sure, Google the variety. I stopped pruning my hydrangeas, even my giant ones that are like the PG hydrangeas, the ones that are limelight, because I might not get as large of a floral head as I like, but I'll get like so many like smaller ones that I can use in arrangements, because we ship our flowers nationwide. And if you do have to just tidy up the plant, it's okay to kind of tidy up and just do like a little bit of trimming around the house or around air conditioning units, stuff like that's fine. But if you do like a heavy pruning, know that you're not going to have that summer influx for certain varieties. So when in doubt, the rule of thumb is just don't prune them back. You'll get flowers either way. If you don't prune them back, you should. Now, another reason why you may not be getting flowers on a Nico hydrangea or your other hydrangeas is because you might have too much nitrogen in the soil. Now, nitrogen is going to promote really beautiful, lush green leaves, and you can have a really healthy looking plant, but it's not going to allow the plant to flower. So you might have to do like a little soil test to see if your soil nitrogen level is too high. And here's the thing, guys, when you fertilize your lawn, a lot of lawn fertilizers have a high concentration of nitrogen. So when you're looking at some products that have fertilizer in them, they usually have like 3 numbers. The first number is the nitrogen number. And if the nitrogen number is higher than the other 2 numbers, that means that that fertilizing product has a high nitrogen concentration. And then when people fertilize their lawns, sometimes some of those sprinkles get put into the garden bed. And then all of a sudden you have a very high nitrogen level in your soil, and you're going to have super beautiful green leaves, but no bloom. So keep an eye on that, guys. Now, another reason why your hydrangeas may not be giving you flowers is because they may not be getting enough sun. Hydrangeas love sun, and hydrangeas do really well in either full sun or full sun in the morning and then afternoon shade. But I want you to check this out. So I've got beautiful hydrangea flowers here. These guys are in full sun. These guys are in full sun. Everything's coming up beautifully here, but if you'll notice, my very last hydrangea bush at the end is in shade. So I have this beautiful limelight hydrangea plant that basically just kind of overgrew, and it made it like it's casting shade on it. So everybody else is blooming, but this guy is not. So I need to trim back this other hydrangea plant next year, so that I'll have some blooms on this plant. So shade's gonna be one of the reasons you're not getting blooms. You're not gonna be getting blooms if you have too much nitrogen, and you're not gonna be getting blooms on a Nico hydrangea if you've cut it back anytime like after July of the season. Limelight hydrangea, they can take a full day of sun and do just fine. They can do spectacular. So it's really important to know what type of hydrangea you have first, and then take a look what the requirements for sun are, because they're going to be different for each plant. But most hydrangeas need at least partial sun to do really well. And like I said, some of them will do better in full sun, and there's some that do better with shade, especially in the afternoon. Most hydrangeas like a lot of sunlight in the morning and then a little bit of afternoon shade. I want to show you the best way to water your hydrangeas, because if you don't provide enough water, you may not get blooms, and if you overwater your hydrangea, you also may not get blooms. And so let me show you how this works out. You had enough, Lucy? Okay, so you're going to water your hydrangeas at the base of the plant in the mornings. You don't want to do this at night. So you're going to come on to the base of the plant, and you're just going to give it a good soaking all the way around the plant, around the base of it. And you're going to do this when the soil feels dry. So a good rule of thumb is to put your finger in the soil about 1 or 2 inches deep, and if the soil's moist, your hydrangea probably doesn't need water. And if you feel the soil is very dry, then you're going to give it a good deep root watering. Now, you don't want to do overhead watering. And I'm actually going to do it on this plant because we just had a huge rainstorm, so it already had an overhead watering. So when people overhead water like this, especially at night, the leaves get super wet and then they stay wet. And then what happens is sometimes temperatures drop during the nighttime, and that's when you start getting these spots on the plant. So this is a super healthy limelight hydrangea, and I usually get loads and loads and loads of gorgeous blooms from this plant. It just happens to bloom later than my Annabelle hydrangea and my endless summer hydrangea and my Nico hydrangea, and that's okay. That's just like the nature of the beast. So if you are worried that there's something wrong with your plant, it might just need a little bit more time this season. Another reason why your limelight hydrangea plant might not be blooming is because it might just be too young. Sometimes when you first put in a limelight hydrangea, it takes 2 or 3 years to start giving you really crazy, beautiful blooms. So be patient if you have a new hydrangea that you've just planted, but just make sure that you keep up with the water, like with any new plants that you put in the ground, because you have to make sure that that root system has enough moisture to establish itself. And so those are some of the major reasons why your hydrangeas may not be blooming in your area. And I hope you guys learned a lot from this video. And let me know if you have any questions or comments about other flowers or hydrangeas, and I'd love to make videos to answer them. And please say hi to us over on my Cranberry Fields Instagram page and also on my Kelly Lehman's Flower Tribe Facebook group, because there's thousands of gardeners from all over the world, and they're asking and answering loads of garden questions over there. And please also check out my brand new garden podcast, and I have about 50 hydrangea care videos that I will link to the end of this video in my hydrangea care playlist. And please also let me know where you're viewing this from in this great, big, beautiful world. I love to see how our flower tribe is growing around the globe each week. And you you can also check out my online flower courses. All of these will be in descriptions below, and I will see you in the next video.